As we transition into the new regulatory world of Quality Management System Regulation or QMSR, there are still a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of confusion. Something like, if I'm ISO 13485 certified, is that sufficient for QMSR compliance? Or how about MDSAP? How about risk management? We hear a lot about that. Hi everyone, my name is Naveen Agarwal and I'm so excited to welcome all of you once again to this special episode of the Let's Talk Risk podcast, where we'll talk about some of these questions with my guest today, Holly Cotter. Holly is the co-founder of indieMedTech, a social and professional networking platform to connect medtech professionals with industry leaders. She's doing a lot of great things there, and we'll talk about that in our conversation today with Holly. But Holly is also a certified regulatory affairs professional with many years of industry experience and in consulting as well. She's a biomedical engineer with direct hands-on clinical experience in her past experience. So I think she brings a very balanced view about QMSR, where the industry is, what we can expect. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Holly. So with that, Holly, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good, Naveen. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here and bring my perspective to this new QMSR transition, which is right around the corner.
Right around the corner, yes. So Holly, I want to start by asking you, what are you hearing about QMSR transition in your circles? I know you get to talk to a lot of medtech professionals, also industry leaders. How is the mood? What are people thinking about?
I'll tell you that I'm not hearing enough about it, I think I'd say.
Okay.
I work primarily with startups and founders and owners of smaller companies. And actually, those are the organizations that are most likely to be impacted by this transition, especially if they don't have any type of international presence with their devices. So I think, there's an assumption that, well, I've written my system to be 13 compliant. There's not much else I have to do, or they just might not be really aware of the transition at all. So what I have been trying to do in my position is to make them aware, bring that to their attention, and how that might directly impact some of the activities that they're doing right now.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that today. I think to some extent, kind of FDA has also downplayed this. I mean, on paper, they say it's not really a big deal. We have always expected manufacturers to have ISO 13485 compliant practices. So it's not a big deal. So I think to some extent, they have downplayed it too. But to me, it seems like a pretty significant transition. And I'm not surprised that people are not talking about it too much. Maybe it's a wait and see. So tell me a little bit more about what we can expect in terms of an explicit change versus what might have been just implicit in the old quality system regulation.
Yeah, sure. So some of the explicit changes are with terminology. So there's some very shift in terminology to 13485 terminology, mostly around like device design history file, device master record, device history record, things like that, as well as management responsibility versus executive responsibility. So some of those, while not in meaning, are necessarily huge or different from what is already laid out in 21 CFR 812 or 820. So the terminology you'll find across quality system documents, which can be a bit of a pain, just to bring your quality system documents up to speed, all your procedures, your quality manual, your work instructions. So again, while not largely different in meaning or intention, it just kind of creates some busy work a little bit to bring everything up to speed with the terminology. So I think from that perspective, that can be a bit of a pain, and more, an explicit change. Another explicit change is under the original QSR, there was an exemption for some documents to be viewed by the auditors, the inspectors. Those included the management review minutes, supplier audits, internal audits. Now, under the QMSR framework, those will now be open and available for auditing by the inspector. I like to think that's not too big of a problem. Those activities should be occurring regardless. Documentation should have happened either way. It's just they might be more heavily scrutinized. I think especially audits and internal audits and following up on any compliance issues or non-compliance is identified. And that kind of brings us to one of the more implied changes around just risk in general, and how risk is not just a design controls aspect, right? It's applied to the entire quality system. So really incorporating risk in those elements of your system where there is the greatest risk to ensure that there's no impact to product safety or effectiveness. So that's probably one of the biggest
Mhm.
implied risks.
Mhm. I'm glad you mentioned terminology because that often is overlooked. People just kind of walk through it. Look at ISO 13485 or 14971, where they define terms and their definitions. And so, for example, the concept of risk itself is very poorly understood. People don't spend enough time. So, I think you make a very good point to really understand why FDA is highlighting the differences in terminology from their point of view, even with respect to 13485. They're not saying that we're going to buy into every definition of 13485 terms. We have our own definition. So I think it'll be important for people to understand exactly what the differences are and how they should implement it beyond the busy work, obviously. I mean, we need to get our paperwork in order, but how we practice it. This is Let's Talk Risk, and you mentioned risk, right? Risk is kind of the underlying thread across 13485. And as you just rightly mentioned, that in the QSR, it was only in one place in design validation. So this could be a big change. Let's talk more about that. First of all, how would FDA interpret risk in the first place? You mentioned safety and effectiveness, but is there anything more to it?
Yeah, so I think now they're going to place a lot more emphasis in different areas and kind of, start from that point. So, for example, complaints, I think in their inspections, they'll probably start from what are some of your highest risk complaints, and then kind of follow that thread and follow through to see if the rest of your quality system elements are working to appropriately respond to those higher risk things. Another area I think where this is going to be seen is in supplier quality, and really
Mhm.
really ensuring that you have adequate and commensurate controls over the suppliers that may carry the most risk to your product. And so it's really just kind of framing each element in terms of risk. And actually something that I like to do, especially with startup companies that are creating their quality system, is actually do a risk assessment of their quality system
Mhm.
itself, not
Mhm.
of the product, but okay, so these are the applicable elements, and here are the ones where, based on our product, based on the complexity of the device, the risk of the device, the magnitude of the organization, what we outsource, what we do internally, there are the areas with the highest risk that require the most attention and time and care, because they may or may not all be the same, right? That's something that I really like to do that I think is very consistent with the shift to QMSR and re-emphasis of risk beyond just design validation risks.
What I'm reading between the lines, and I would love your perspective on this, Holly, is what I'm reading between the lines is that now FDA has explicit regulatory language to pull the thread, pull this risk thread across your QMS. I mean, they were doing that previously also, but they could not really write you up exactly like that. They could write you up at most for risk analysis, vaguely under design validation. But I think now they have explicit regulatory language to pull this thread across multiple subsystems of your quality management system. So you have to really make sure that you have a working process, not just documented process, but a working process that is effectively managing risk. Am I reading that correctly? What is your view on that?
That's absolutely correct. And I do wonder if maybe one of the drivers for this transition is maybe they took a look at the kind of root cause analyses of a lot of the recalls that have happened in the US, and where maybe some of those recalls could have been prevented with some heavier scrutiny under an FDA auditor, things like that. But I think that what you're saying is correct. I think that they were looking for uh, easier things to point to when
Mhm.
writing non-compliance um, reports. It'll be interesting to see what these new inspections look like,
Mhm. Mhm.
especially considering the implementation date of this is going to come before those inspection criteria are released. So I'm very interested to see what comes after QSIT. I think that's
Well,
definitely a big unknown.
my understanding is that they are declining to update the QSIT. What they are saying is that it won't be a updated QSIT, but more like a our inspection methodology or something like that approach we will publish or something like that. I don't know what they will do. That's what I'm hearing. Are you hearing
Oh,
anything
okay.
different? Yeah, yeah.
What I'm hearing is that the inspectors aren't ready
Okay.
necessarily
Okay.
to audit to QMSR. Now that might be, maybe that's not true. I really hope that they come up with some type of guidance document around it.
Yeah.
They did recently come out with a PMA quality system guidance document to provide guidance for the quality system information
Mhm.
to be included in a PMA submission. So I know some folks are kind of looking at that to see if they can glean anything, but I don't think it's quite providing the usefulness. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I would definitely recommend that there's an increased emphasis from organizations on training and mock audits to especially to some of these areas where maybe they aren't used to an FDA inspector really digging in.
Mhm.
But I'll be very interested to see kind of what comes from that.
Yeah, I'm really glad you made that point because even those who have been operating under ISO 13485 certification, they are used to notified bodies. They are not
Mm.
used to FDA inspecting them under 13485, which is a
Right.
totally different ballgame. Totally different ballgame, right? FDA can take as much time they want. They can be there for as long as they need to be. They can look at whatever they want. Whereas notified bodies, maybe a couple of days here and there, they will come and go, and you probably pretty much know what they're going to ask. So it'll have to be a change in the mindset, I think, how you will deal with an FDA inspection, where the investigator will actually probe your implementation of 13485 for effectiveness. It'll be a totally different game. So your point about training and practicing and doing some mock audits is a good one. I hope people kind of take that away as a key insight from our conversation today. So, Holly, let's continue. One of the key points I think I want to talk to you about is this whole MDSAP model, right? I know FDA came out with this a few years ago. Many regulatory agencies have signed up to it. Many companies are participating in it, not everybody. What is your view on sort of the alignment between MDSAP model and where the FDA might expect manufacturers to be under the QMSR compliance framework?
Yeah, so MDSAP will of course it'll have to reflect some of those differences between the QMSR and 13485, right? Because FDA did not fully 100% adopt 13485. There are still some specific things that they retained, as well as some additional regulations that are not in 13485 that are required, right? So you're thinking your 812s, your 58s, things like that. It's really important, I think, for manufacturers to understand that just because they have passed MDSAP previously doesn't mean that they're going to check all the boxes for QMSR in the future, because there are still all of those other FDA specific clauses and things like that. The other thing to note too is that MDSAP is accepted by the FDA for routine audits, but not for unannounced for cause audits, right? So there is still that part of it that they need to ensure that they really have their ducks in a row, because if FDA gets a tip or something, they can come in, and that's outside of the scope of MDSAP.
Yeah, yeah. But let me ask you this way. For even those who are not in the MDSAP program or not under ISO 13485 today, because FDA has not given further guidance on how the inspections would take place, would it be a meaningful first step in understanding how the MDSAP audit model works in the first place, at a first step? And whether it's sufficient, and what else would they need to do? Or like, how should they get even started in on this journey of sort of inspection readiness for FDA?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. I think that if there is anything to look at in terms of like some type of auditing model, the MDSAP guide would probably be the best place to start. I think though, first and foremost, especially considering it's right around the corner, if you're not quite there yet with full QMSR compliance or QMSR inspection readiness, get a plan in place, get a
Mm-hmm.
quality plan in place first and foremost. A lot of times, if the FDA comes in and maybe you're not quite there yet, but you have a really thorough plan, they will give you grace a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you can demonstrate actionable steps to executing that plan. So I think first and for while becoming inspection ready would be part of that overall plan. I think the first step is really just getting that plan, initiating that plan, looking at your quality system, comparing it to the doing a gap analysis, all that kind of good stuff, so you can then form an action plan. And I think where it gets really tricky for startup companies, who are most likely to be the most affected by this because
Mm-hmm.
maybe they're only targeting the US, they don't necessarily have a full-time quality person to do that, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's where I think consultants come in and can really kind of help fill that gap. I think that in and of itself contributes to inspection readiness, is having that quality plan to say, this is where we're at, but we're headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it, Holly, but I don't think many people are familiar with quality plans. So can you briefly describe what a quality plan is and what are some of the essential elements of a quality plan?
Yeah, absolutely. So a quality plan is a really great tool to, if you're identifying maybe a larger system-wide quality gap or change in quality, that you then would want to take a more holistic view, not just of like a specific product or device, but of maybe the whole portfolio or your whole organization. If there is, usually you would initiate a quality plan maybe if there is a new standard that comes out, or if maybe there is a system-wide nonconformance identified. So it's essentially a framework and mechanism to allow you to identify the quality problem or gap or change the how it may affect your system, your products, and any activities that would be necessary to address any of those gaps. And it's just kind of like a really good way to just house everything, and it's a bit more proactive than reactive, and it's not necessarily associated with a like a corrective action where the CAPA mechanism might be a little bit more appropriate. That's, really where we recommend, because a gap assessment is definitely important, but then there's, well, what happens next? And you want to have a nice package to show an auditor, well, this is what we plan, this is what's going to happen next based on the gap assessment. It makes auditors, especially FDA inspectors, very happy.
Very happy. Yeah. So I want to double click on that because it's such an important point. So what I'm hearing you say is it's a very, very simple way of defining the purpose of what the quality plan is about, what is in scope, what is out of scope, who's responsible for doing what kind of activities we will do, what's the time frame for those activities, who will be responsible for those activities, and how would we know what output would be delivered from those activities? How would we judge that we have executed the quality plan correctly? Who should be authorizing and approving the plan? Who should be providing resources? So am I kind of reading this correctly as to like basic essential elements of planning can go into building a quality plan? It doesn't have to be complex or hundreds of pages. It can be very simple, but apply a planning approach is what I think should be used here and not like a fancy big template.
Yeah, absolutely. All of those elements that you said is what I always include in my quality plan. So I'm glad that you kind of got granular there. And what it would look like is just a document with all of those items, and you just maintain it. It's really useful. If someone comes in and says, where are you at with this? You can point, this is what we're doing. This is what's left. I think it shows that quality is driving your activities. And when you can demonstrate that quality is driving your activities, you get started on the right foot with an inspector. And I really feel like that's what quality plans do. So that's why I always recommend them from a logistical standpoint. It's just really helpful for project planning, but they don't have to be complex. They don't have to be long, commensurate with the scope of the project that it is, right?
And also, very importantly, that is a way for you to demonstrate risk-based thinking. Because you could also prioritize your activities and actions and allocate resources appropriately according to the risk of not meeting that objective.
Yes,
so you could demonstrate to an inspector that you have risk-based thinking. So taking a step back, I know we sometimes get too hung up on the details of exactly how something needs to be done, proceduralize it, or make a template. I want us to take a step back and understand the concept of the quality plan first, and really treat this as no different than any other plan, like a risk management plan you write, or like design and development plan you write. You basically adopt the same model and you write up a quality plan to describe actions you will take, roles and responsibilities, resources, purpose, scope, in scope. How will you measure whether success has been achieved or not? What's the time frame? So I want people to kind of feel like this is not that difficult. It doesn't have to be that difficult. It can be done by using just basic project management skills is what I would like people to hear. Very nice, Holly. I didn't intend to go into so much detail about the quality plan, but it is so critical, in my opinion, to show readiness. Let's say in the highly unlikely scenario that on February 3rd or 5th, FDA shows up on your door, starts to question you because they'll expect you to have QMSR compliance. At the very least, prepare a quality plan. to show them where you are, your good faith intentions of meeting this objective. And I think you'll be in a much better shape. So I'm glad that we went into this much detail, and I hope people will kind of find this conversation useful. So, Holly, I want to continue this topic a little bit more and ask you any basic assumptions people are making that, in your view, are really not justified, that they should be thinking like that. Anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think probably one of them is that, well, we're 1345 compliant, or we're 1345 certified, so that's it. We don't have to do anything else. And that's just simply not true. Maybe your load is a lot, smaller to lift, but there is still some actions. I just off the top of my head, for example, I know that pretty much every auditing procedure says that if it's a US audit, don't show them your management review meeting minutes, don't show them your internal audit report. So just for one example, that alone requires some updates, and as well as terminology definitions that we kind of talked about before.
Any other thing that comes to mind in terms of assumptions people might be making about what they're required to do or not?
I think a question or a point of confusion is that FDA will accept 1345 certificates as meeting the QMSR. That is not true, again, because not only are they just not doing that, but also QMSR is not just 13485, right? It's 13485 minus a little bit, plus a little bit, and then all of those other FDA regulations. So I think that's probably the other biggest.
Yeah. And, I think to these examples that you have given, I'll add that just because FDA came out with a recent pre-market guidance for their expectations for QMSR compliance for key PMA submissions, doesn't mean that they're ignoring the post-market side of it. So,
yes.
So I don't think people should assume that, FDA has just produced a guidance for PMA submissions, and for post-market, fine, I don't have to do a whole lot of stuff. Probably don't do that, because I think it's a prioritization from FDA's point of view to be more clear about what they would expect for a PMA submission, because the pre-approval inspection might depend on that. Right?
Yep, exactly.
Great. So, Holly, as you talk to your circle of friends or network MedTech professionals, senior executives, what are you finding as top of mind for them in terms of, again, let's talk about what they should be concerned about?
I think honestly, it's just kind of like the thorn in people's sides right now.
Okay.
There's so many other
things going
priorities. Yeah, especially for the companies that are going to be the most affected. I think it's difficult to even place priority on it. And again, like we kind of talked about before with the quality plan, it doesn't need to be difficult. It's just that it just has to be kind of done. And what you don't want to be doing is to get a call that you're going to get an FDA inspection and then you're scrambling. That's what you really, really don't want. So I think, the first thing that I'm hearing is, well, isn't it just 13485?
Yeah, same.
So there's a little bit of education from that perspective and kind of level setting everybody. And then, okay, well then what does that mean I really need to do? So I think that's most of what I'm hearing, which I would kind of maybe FDA could have done a bit more on the education front to help kind of guide the industry on what those big changes are. And maybe they have, and I just haven't been linked into it. But yeah, I'll be interested to see how some of the initial inspections go.
Yeah.
And to hear kind of feedback from industry on those for some of those early folks who are subjected to some of the initial inspections under this.
Yes. So, Holly, let's say you are that one informed, highly passionate regulatory affairs professional or a quality professional in a company, which the general mood is like, we'll see what happens. And fine, we are under 1345. Fine, we'll see what happens. And you find yourself in a hallway conversation with your senior VP of QARA. What would your recommendation be for such a passionate, informed professional to do or say in that moment to gain their buy-in?
I would say what you don't want is to implement a quality management system under QMSR while the FDA is waiting in the lobby. I have been in those types of remediation efforts where the FDA showed up, or we found that the FDA was coming very soon, and that's when everyone scrambles. That's not when you want to be scrambling, because who knows what the other product related activities and priorities will be at the time. and just, take it. It's something that can be taken step by step, like we talked about before. And then I'd
Yeah.
probably give a good pitch for a quality plan.
Yeah. So, what you're saying is basically create a sense of urgency, but also show them a roadmap through a quality
Yes.
plan. And this can be done in less than a minute.
Mm.
And what I see now in this conversation with you is a tremendous leadership opportunity for QARA professionals in our industry to show that leadership, show that initiative and drive and passion, and also a plan of action. So, I kind of encourage everybody who's listening today to think about it that way. And I certainly hope that we can elevate actually the position and status of our function in our companies by playing a more strategic role. So, Holly, great conversation. We have already touched upon a lot of different topics. I don't want to end this conversation without asking you about indieMedTech. Tell me a little bit more about how it started, what got you on this journey after many years in the industry and consulting business, and where you hope to take this.
Yeah. So during my time in industry, I've worked for, the whole spectrum of sizes of organizations. And in the last 5 years, I've been a consultant. And when I transitioned from a larger, more kind of corporate consulting firm, I kind of realized how, incredibly important having your community around you is, and not only to your own professional growth, but also to just the success of the medical technology that you're supporting. I genuinely would not be here if it were not for my group. They all know who they are. And with that, I think, myself and other co-founder Nikki Spaniel realized that while we have that and we're very fortunate, not everyone might. So we really wanted to try and bring that community to the greater industry and connect people who maybe don't have their own circle quite yet, or maybe they do, but they need some expertise from another area that isn't in their immediate group. So that's really our goal with indieMedTech, is to connect professionals from across the medtech industry. And it's a kind of standalone platform. It's not on LinkedIn or anything, though we do a lot of LinkedIn work. It's its own platform, and we invite anyone to join. And if you are a business owner in the medtech space and you want to connect with maybe new potential opportunities, then we invite you to join our marketplace. And we're just continuing to grow and listen, and we're really excited about this year and kind of what we have up our sleeves.
I'm super excited to hear about that. I do believe we need something like this in our space because there is really not much support for startups and small organizations. They don't know where to go for answers, and this community can help them. I wish you all the best, Holly, for that. Great initiative. I hope you are successful, and we will give a link to indieMedTech in the show notes so people can find you and be a part of this conversation. Holly, thank you so much for taking the time to come to the show and sharing your insights. We have a lot packed in there, so I encourage people to listen to this podcast when they have a little bit of free time and participate in the conversation. Share your own views and perspectives, how you are preparing, what challenges you are finding. Please share all that in the comments below. Thank you again, Holly.
Thank you so much, Amin.